Hey everybody, it's low carb and keto nutrition specialist Amy Berger bringing you the one and only keto without the crazy. I have a very long video for you today, but it's long because it's a really, really important topic and I don't want to leave anything out. I want to make sure that I tell you everything I think you need to know. I refuse to shortchange this. What are we talking about today? Thyroid. This is actually a presentation that I gave at Low Carb Denver in February 2023. But the good news is that when I now get to do this for my own YouTube channel and bring this to you, I'm not time limited. I had about a 25-minute speaking slot to give at least a 60-minute talk, if not a 90-minute talk. And also being able to do it for my channel now. I'm at liberty to say things or say things in a certain way that I could not say on stage at an academic conference. So I feel very excited, honored, privileged, and a little bit nervous to be bringing this to you because it is so important. And I honestly, truly hope that this helps you. If you have a thyroid condition, if you know you have a thyroid condition, specifically low thyroid, hypothyroidism, and you still feel terrible, like you feel like maybe the medication you're on or the treatment that you're receiving is not really getting you where you want to go, or if you have long suspected that you have a thyroid problem, but you've been told for years that your thyroid is normal, it's not your thyroid, this video is for you. So please bear with me. Take the time to watch the whole thing, even if you have to pause and come back later. If there's anything I'm as passionate about, if not more passionate about, than low carb and ketogenic diets, it is thyroid. So without further ado, let's get into things. I'm going to share my slides. I have slides and the whole thing here. Hopefully the technology gods will be with us and everything will go smoothly. Okay, bear with me here. Okay, let's go. Let's talk about thyroid and thyroid hormones, and specifically thyroid hormones with regard to low carb diets. However, I do want to point out that if you know someone, if a friend or loved one has hypothyroidism, or you suspect they do, or they suspect they do, I definitely recommend sharing this video with them because most of this applies to just thyroid in general. There's only a little bit that's specific to low carb. But so anyone who is struggling with the thyroid issue, I think could benefit from this. So if you know someone who really could use thyroid information and they're not on a low carb or keto diet, don't let that stop you from sharing this with them. Okay. I hope that this video is spread and shared far and wide beyond my usual audience. So in case there's anybody new watching me, I just want to give you a very quick introduction so you'll know who I am and where I'm coming from. My name is Amy Berger. I have a master's degree in human nutrition and I'm a CNS, a certified nutrition specialist. And that's not an RD, I'm not a dietitian, but I do have graduate level training and certification in nutrition. I am the author or co-author of 3 books. You see them here. My most recent book is the top left, End Your Carb Confusion, co-written with Dr. Eric Westman, super well-known keto expert authority from Duke University. My very first book, top right, was The Alzheimer's Antidote, which is all about using a low-carb or ketogenic diet for Alzheimer's disease, which they regularly refer to now as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. And my second book, yes, these are placed out of order, down at the bottom is The Stall Slayer, which is all about breaking those dreaded fat loss stalls on low carb and ketogenic diets. And I am hard at work right now on book number 4, which is all about thyroid. It's going to be my first book that's not really a keto book. It's all about thyroid. I have spoken at low carb and keto conferences in the US and abroad. I helped write the curriculum that the American Nutrition Association uses to certify, to certify people in the ketogenic diet. And I also just ended my tenure on the committee that writes the board exam to certify nutrition specialists. But most important of all, I am one of you. I am a thyroid patient myself. That's how I came to learn so much of what I'm going to share with you in this talk. I also personally eat a very low carbohydrate diet. I've been eating a low carb or keto diet for over 15 years, and I'm maintaining about a 35-pound weight loss. And if 35 pounds doesn't sound like much, I know some of you watching have probably lost 50, 100 pounds or more. I'm just letting you know I'm 5'2", so I'm very short. 35 pounds makes a very big difference on somebody my height. Enough about me. Time to get into things. I just want to be very clear right here up front. I just said I'm a certified nutrition specialist. I am not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. Nothing I am sharing with you in this presentation is meant to be medical advice. It is not a substitute for treatment or guidance from your medical professionals. Okay. I have a request for you. As you watch this presentation, please keep an open mind. And I say that because a lot of what I'm going to say is very controversial and unconventional. But if you've had any success on a low carb or ketogenic diet, compared to the mainstream information that we hear about nutrition and health and food, that's pretty unconventional and controversial too. So unconventional and controversial is not necessarily bad. It might actually be good, right? So anyway, keep an open mind. If there happen to be any medical professionals watching this, and I hope there are, I understand that a lot of what I'm going to say goes against what you were taught. But again, there's thousands of medical professionals out there now using keto diets in their clinics with their patients. And this goes against, this goes against what they were taught in medical school or PA school or nurse practitioner school or whatever kind of professional you are. So just keep an open mind and we'll see what we can learn here. Why do we need to talk about thyroid on a low carb keto YouTube channel? Why would a low carb nutritionist really care about thyroid? Well, I see clients all the time, and I can guarantee I'd put down a lot of money that some of you watching right now will fit this description. You're doing everything right, or my client, they're doing everything right. Metabolically, they look great. Their blood sugar is low normal, the fasting glucose, the hemoglobin A1C is great, the insulin is great, their triglycerides are low, the HDL is high, everything is fabulous. This is proof to me that they are sticking to a low carb diet. Metabolically, they have the profile of someone who eats a very low carb or ketogenic diet. But maybe their cholesterol was on the high side, so their doctor may have prescribed a statin. Maybe they have some depression, so they may be taking an antidepressant medication, possibly more than one antidepressant medication, and the weight won't budge. They're carrying excess weight, and despite sticking diligently and faithfully to a low carb or keto diet, the excess weight will not budge. And this person, my client, or maybe I'm speaking to you right now, you probably feel frustrated, demoralized, disappointed. You might even feel a little angry, a little furious at this situation because here you are working so hard and you're healthy. On the inside, you're healthy, but this weight won't budge and maybe you have some other issues going on. So why would someone have a hard time losing weight if they maybe have a thyroid problem? Well, you are probably familiar with this phrase. They often refer to thyroid hormones or the thyroid gland as the master regulator of your metabolic rate. And if you have a thyroid problem, and again, I'm talking specifically about low thyroid, hypothyroidism, it can be difficult to lose weight even with a good diet and exercise, including keto. So a low thyroid can make it very, very difficult to lose body fat, even on a good, strict keto diet. And it is not uncommon to have hypothyroidism, but go undiagnosed for years and years and years. You might have even been accused of lying about your diet and exercise. If you have been to the doctor, and please know here, I use the word doctor as just a convenient shorthand, but when I say doctor, I'm referring to any medical professional with prescribing capacity, with prescribing ability. So a doctor, a PA, a nurse practitioner, any of those, anyone who can prescribe you medicine and order tests. So we call this medical gaslighting, that somebody may make you think, no, it's not your thyroid. You must be lying to me about what you eat and how much you exercise. Because if you were on a keto diet and you were exercising, you would be losing weight. So therefore, you must be lying. This is very, very common, and it's heartbreaking. You can't out keto a major hormone imbalance, but keto can help sometimes, and I'll get to that much, much later on in this talk. So keto helps thyroid for some people, but it doesn't in many people. Like, keto doesn't automatically fix this. So how do you know if you do have low thyroid? What are some of the signs and symptoms to look for? Please understand that what you see on this slide here are really just the main classic hallmark symptoms. There are many, many others. The thyroid gland or thyroid hormones do set your metabolic rate, and they affect there is not one organ, gland, or tissue system in your body that is not impacted by thyroid hormones. Meaning that if you have low thyroid, you could have signs or symptoms in any part of your body, any aspect. So if you have some unexplained, uncomfortable issues that you don't see listed here, don't assume that it's not thyroid. And you don't have to have all of the ones that you do see listed here. If you only have a few of these, that's still enough to warrant further testing. And we'll talk about what kinds of tests to do in a little bit. But these are really the biggest, most common symptoms. Weight gain, like no change to your diet and exercise. You've been eating and living a certain way the whole time, maintaining a certain weight, and yet all of a sudden you start gaining weight. So unexplained weight gain, difficulty losing weight, again, even on a keto diet, depression or apathy, constipation, hair loss, feeling cold all the time. Some people have brain fog, low libido, no sex drive, slow heart rate, low blood pressure. Everything in your body just slows down. It's like you're on power save mode, or like you're hibernating. You're just really set to slow mode. You don't have any oomph like you used to. And I explain to people the constipation, even the muscle contractions in your colon that move waste along are slower. So the waste backs up in your colon and you get constipated. And so again, the slow heart rate, low blood pressure, high cholesterol can be an indicator of low thyroid. Now, of course, on low carb and keto diets, cholesterol can be elevated for any number of other reasons, and it's not automatically a problem. We don't have time to get into that tonight. There's mountains and mountains of research out there indicating that high cholesterol is not really an issue on a very low carb diet. It may not even be an issue in other situations, but I won't get into that. My point is that elevated cholesterol is a common sign of low thyroid. We're going to come back to that. We need to talk about the thyroid hormones so that you understand what you're looking at when you get certain tests, or what is going on in your own body. If you suspect you have a thyroid issue, or you know you do, then it is important for you, again, to understand what is happening inside you so that you can seek the appropriate testing and treatment. I call some of these thyroid-related hormones rather than thyroid hormones because they don't all actually come from the thyroid gland. And if I'm pointing here, it's because this is where your thyroid gland is. It's you see that on the slide. It's that butterfly-shaped gland in front of your windpipe around here. So the first one to know about is thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH. TRH comes from a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. And TRH goes from the hypothalamus to a different part of your brain called the pituitary gland, and it tells your pituitary gland to produce and secrete something called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. You are no doubt familiar with TSH because This is the gold standard conventional test that they do when you ask for a thyroid test, or if your doctor says, I checked your thyroid, they almost always mean TSH. And this is a huge problem. We're going to see why very soon, but this is what they were taught in medical school. This is simply what they were taught, so they think that this is the best way. But again, I said kind of earlier, most doctors aren't taught about carbohydrate restriction and ketogenic diets, except in the case of epilepsy. Doctors don't really learn about keto in medical school. So just because something isn't taught in medical school doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do, at least for some people. So again, TSH is normally the only thing that's tested when you ask for a thyroid test or when a doctor evaluates your thyroid function. TSH does exactly what it sounds like it does. It stimulates the thyroid. TSH says, hey, thyroid, knock, knock, go ahead and make some thyroid hormone. It stimulates the thyroid to make hormone. And the thing that the thyroid gland produces most is T4. But we're going to come back to that in a second. The thing to understand is that neither of these is made or released by the thyroid gland. So TSH is not a thyroid hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. And the reason that they test TSH, the reason that TSH is the gold standard test is because the thinking goes that there's a feedback system. Your endocrine system has a lot of feedback loops. And when your actual thyroid hormone starts to get low, the pituitary gland senses that, and it will raise TSH to stimulate the thyroid to make more hormone. So again, as the thyroid hormone gets low, the TSH should get higher to say, hey, thyroid, wake up already and make some hormone. So it's assumed that if your TSH is normal, then your actual thyroid hormones must also be normal, because if they weren't, your TSH would be elevated. Because it's not elevated, you must not have low thyroid hormones. This is not the case for many, many people. Elevated TSH absolutely can identify cases of hypothyroidism, but there are so many people out there whose TSH is normal, but they have raging signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism. And again, this is why we say it's medical gaslighting. When a medical professional says, oh, it's not your thyroid, nothing's wrong, when all they did was check the TSH. They did not actually measure the next couple of hormones that we're going to look at, your actual thyroid hormones. So I just cannot emphasize that enough. If you've been told for years and years that your thyroid is normal, but you've only ever had the TSH tested, you absolutely positively must do the comprehensive thyroid panel testing. And I will walk you through that later on in this presentation. But let's get back to the slides, shall we? Okay. Now we are actually in the thyroid gland. So we've got a hormone called T4. This is produced by the thyroid gland, and T4 is an inactive thyroid hormone. This is all over the published scientific literature. It is referred to as an inactive form. So it is a precursor to the type of hormone that is the most potent, most active form, which is T3. And just in case you're ever on Jeopardy, or I don't even know if Jeopardy is still on, if you're ever on some kind of trivia quiz show, the 4 and 3 in T4 and T3 come because of the amount of iodine attached to the molecule. T4 has 4 atoms of iodine. T3 has 3 atoms of iodine. So if you've ever heard that iodine is important for the thyroid, this is why. Thyroid hormone literally has iodine atoms in it, and that's part of what it needs for proper function. And the enzyme that converts T4 into T3 requires the mineral selenium. So you've probably also heard that selenium is important for thyroid. just about any over-the-counter, thyroid support supplement or thyroid support complex that you'll find will have iodine and selenium in it, along with some other nutrients, but almost always iodine and selenium, and that's why. So T4, your thyroid gland produces much more T4 than T3. It does produce a tiny bit of T3, but it produces mostly T4. And T4 is converted into T3 in other parts of your body. But it is very important to understand that your thyroid gland itself does convert a little bit. So there's T4 circulating in the blood, and as it circulates back through the thyroid gland, some of that is converted into T3. This is very important for anyone watching who has had their thyroid gland removed or irradiated. If you've had thyroid cancer or Graves' disease, and you've had a treatment that has removed your thyroid gland or rendered it non-functional, then you are typically, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. You are in a situation where you have lost everything that the thyroid gland produces. You've lost the T4 and the T3 and some other molecules that the thyroid produces. And you've lost whatever additional amount of T3 would be converted from the T4. That's important. We're going to come back to that when I walk you through the thyroid medications. Okay, so the T4 and T3 are measured as total T4 and total T3, or free T4 and free T3. Hormones cannot just travel throughout the blood willy-nilly. They are typically escorted, if you will, bound to a binding protein. And the binding protein helps protect the hormone while it travels through the blood until it reaches its intended tissue or cells. And so the hormone that we are most interested in when we are looking at thyroid function and helping you to feel your best is free T3, because the thyroid hormone doesn't do anything floating in your blood. It has to get inside your cells. It doesn't do anything just floating in the bloodstream. But in order to get into your cell, it has to be free of the binding protein. It has to be unbound. It has to be free to get into the cell. So the number one most powerful, most biologically active, potent form of thyroid hormone is T3, specifically the free T3. So it is absolutely critical to test total T3 and free T3 if you suspect that you have low thyroid, but your TSH is normal. I'm going to repeat that because it's so important. You must test free T3 and possibly also total T3 if you think you have low thyroid, but your TSH is normal. The reason I like to test, or I recommend that my clients test the total T3, is because the free T3 is the one that's most potent, that's going to get into the cell. But if we need the total amount of T3 to be at a normal level for there even to be enough free T3, right? So the total T3 gives us some indication of how much your body is converting T4. Because if that's where most of the T3 comes from, then we want to see how big is the pool of total T3, and that will give us some indication of how much of the T4 your body is converting into T3. The next thing that's important to know about is reverse T3. Most of what I've already said is controversial, but this is super controversial among certain people, among other thyroid professionals. This is everyday stuff. They don't think anything of this. This is very normal. Think of reverse T3 as a T3 imposter. I'm going to be slightly unscientific here, but it looks like T3. It has the shape of T3. It either fits into the receptor for T3 on your cell, or it kind of sits right there. But it doesn't perform the same action as the real T3. Remember, it's kind of an imposter. It's an impersonator. But when the reverse T3 is sitting there in the receptor, the real T3 can't get through. So even if your blood level of free T3 is normal, If your reverse T3 is a little bit on the higher side, it doesn't matter how much T3 of free, real T3 is floating around, it can't get in. So this is something that can be helpful to test when your T3 is normal, but you still have a lot of signs and symptoms of low thyroid. And even if your T3 is in the normal range and your reverse T3 is in the normal range, if your actual real T3 is at the lower end of its range and the reverse T3 is at the higher end of its range, that ratio can explain why you might have signs and symptoms of low thyroid, because there's just not enough of the real T3 getting in. So reverse T3 is elevated during times of severe stress, including recovery from an injury, recovering from surgery, something like that. It is also elevated very often in severe caloric restriction. And I'm going to talk about this again later on in the presentation, but very, very low calorie diets, particularly when combined with exercise or over exercise, can cause reverse T3 to elevate, because your body is trying to protect you. Remember, T3 is responsible for your metabolic rate, for how quickly your body burns through energy. So if you are eating very, very little and you're working out a ton as a protective defensive mechanism, your body will elevate that reverse T3 to put the brakes on your metabolism. Good luck hitting the gym. Good luck, doing intense workouts when you have signs and symptoms of low thyroid, when you're fatigued and constipated and you're cold all the time and you're depressed. Good luck hitting the gym. So that's more than you wanted to know. Many, many medical professionals refuse to measure T3. I just walked you through why you might want to measure it. There's also thyroid-related antibodies. These can help identify autoimmune issues regarding thyroid. So Hashimoto's is autoimmune low thyroid, and the autoimmune overactive thyroid is Graves' disease. And Hashimoto's, everybody's probably heard of Hashimoto's, or Hashi's, they call it sometimes. Hashimoto's is not the only kind of low thyroid. It's very well known, but not all cases of hypothyroidism are Hashimoto's. I want to walk you through an example of why the TSH is not always sufficient to identify cases of low thyroid. And again, I know I've said this more than once already, but you absolutely must understand this. If you suspect that you have low thyroid, but you've been told that it's not your thyroid, there's nothing wrong with your thyroid, you must test more than just the TSH, because again, I see this all the time in clients. Why? Because they're coming to me because they can't lose weight. Even on a strict keto diet, the weight isn't moving. Very often they have the other signs and symptoms too. It's typically not just the weight. So let's look at this person who was on a low carb diet and she was not taking any thyroid medication at this time. Her A1C was 5.0. Total cholesterol is a bit high, 275. That's on, high cholesterol. Her triglycerides were very low at 33. The HDL is nice and high at 100 milligrams per deciliter, and her LDL is a bit high. Her TSH was normal. That TSH level is within the normal range. Now, if anything, it's at the very low end of the range. So you might suspect she had hyperthyroid, overactive thyroid, right? Her TSH is normal, but at the low end. But her total T4 was low and her free T3 was low. And if she had only tested her TSH, she would not have had any explanation for why she had all of these horrible, debilitating symptoms. If her doctor had tested TSH and said, well, your TSH is normal, it's not your thyroid, she would not have known why she had extreme depression and apathy, severe hair loss, no libido. Again, we've got the high cholesterol here, severe constipation, and weight gain with no change to her diet and exercise. She had been maintaining a nice slender weight on a low carb keto diet, exercising regularly, no change to any of that, and she had inexplicably gained a significant amount of weight. She had a very savvy, very knowledgeable medical professional to work with, thank goodness. So this doctor prescribed her a combination of T4 and T3 medication. And what happened? Her TSH plummeted to the basement. It's actually suppressed below the reference range. That's very important. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So her TSH is very low now, but her free T4 is normal and her free T3 is normal. So now her actual thyroid hormone levels are normal. And look what happened. Her symptoms resolved within weeks. She rapidly lost the weight she had gained. Again, no change to the keto diet she was already doing and the habitual exercise she was already doing for years. The A1C is still nice and low, triglycerides still nice and low, HDL still nice and high. What happened to the cholesterol? Her total cholesterol dropped 80 points with no change to her diet and exercise. The only change here is the thyroid medicine. I see this in clients all the time, and I can't prescribe medicine. I can't take medicine away. But how many clients do I have who are on cholesterol drugs or on antidepressants when what they really need is thyroid medicine? And here's something important. She had no signs or symptoms of hyperthyroidism, of being over-medicated. I have to tell you about this because look at the top line, the TSH, where I say it's low or suppressed. Doctors, again, the way they're taught in medical school is that if TSH is low, then you have an overactive thyroid. Why? Because if your actual thyroid hormones are high, if you have overactive thyroid, then your pituitary gland doesn't need to make any TSH. You don't want to stimulate the thyroid anymore because you already have too much thyroid hormone. Therefore, your TSH level goes down. It's the opposite of when you have low thyroid hormones and the TSH goes up. So if you take thyroid medicine, it is actually very, very normal and common and 100% logical as to why your TSH would plummet even down below the reference range. And it's because if you are taking thyroid hormone medicine from the outside, your body doesn't need to make any. So your pituitary gland kind of shuts off the TSH. So of course the TSH is very, very low. You don't need to stimulate your thyroid with thyroid stimulating hormone when you're getting it from the outside. So, but the problem is some doctors don't know that, or they also are worried that you will have, problematic, dangerous signs and symptoms from being over-medicated. But this person in this example had no signs or symptoms of being over-medicated. In fact, she felt great. She felt better than she had in years. All of those terrible symptoms were gone. So how can we say she was over-medicated, regardless of that TSH level being suppressed? How can we say she's over-medicated or we have given her hyperthyroidism when she has no signs or symptoms whatsoever of that? It's really important for you to understand this because you may have even been in this situation where you're on thyroid medicine, you feel great, everything's finally going well, and maybe you had an appointment and your TSH was suppressed. And so the doctor got worried and they reduced your dose. So they reduced your thyroid medicine dose. And maybe you still feel great. Maybe you don't. Maybe your symptoms start to come back. Now, granted, your doctor is being safe. I understand if there's medical professionals out here, kudos, you want to keep your patients safe. So to the lay people, to the patients and clients here watching, they are doing what they think is right. They're doing what they think is best for you. It is what they were taught. But we are not always taught, whether in medical school or nutrition school, sometimes what we're taught is not exactly what we see in clinical practice with real live human beings. So just remember that if your TSH is very, very low, it does not automatically mean that you're over-medicated, particularly if you don't have any signs and symptoms. And here's something that I was not allowed to say on stage in Denver. The reason I'm so passionate about this and the reason I'm so familiar with this particular case is because those numbers were my numbers. That was me on this slide. That was me with the cholesterol that dropped 80 points. That was me with the severe constipation and the hair loss and the depression. So those were my numbers. Okay, back to the slides. But this is how you're not alone. If you have been medically gaslit, if you have long suspected that there's something wrong and yet no one is helping you, everyone's telling you that nothing's wrong, it's all in your head, you need to eat less and move more, you are not alone. I see this all the time. There is help available for you. Keep watching. We'll get to that. Okay, where are we? Okay, moving on. TSH is not always sufficient. This is a quote from Dr. Antonio Bianco. He's a former president of the American Thyroid Association. It doesn't get more conventional than that, right? He came out with a book just late 2022 called Rethinking Hypothyroidism. Treatment of hypothyroidism is not as simple as we physicians or patients have been told. Many more things need to be considered in addition to circulating levels of TSH. You heard it directly out of the mouth or off the pen or off the keyboard of a former president of the American Thyroid Association that we need to consider a lot more besides just the TSH. Do you know who Dr. Bernstein is? Are you familiar with Dr. Richard Bernstein? He is a legend. He's an absolute legend in the world of diabetes, particularly type 1 diabetes. And he's just extremely well known in the low carb and keto world. Those of you that are fans of Dr. Westman calls Dr. Bernstein the Oracle. So if that gives you some idea of this guy's bona fides, he's just an absolute legend. I'll leave it at that. And this is a little tidbit that I was given by somebody who knows Dr. Bernstein really well. Serum TSH does not reflect T3 levels throughout the body. It is not a good marker for hypothyroidism or thyroid status. Serum-free T3 is the best indicator of thyroid status. And for most people, or many people, the treatment should be T3 replacement because that is usually where the major deficiency is. The standard of care is wrong and hypothyroidism is grossly mistreated. So, serum-free T3 is the best indicator of thyroid status. I actually disagree, with all due respect to Dr. Bernstein, absolutely. I think, remember what I said earlier, thyroid hormones don't do any good floating in your blood. They have to get inside your cells. Unfortunately, we don't have any simple or easy way to measure that. So the second runner-up, the second best thing to measure is the serum-free T3. But just because there's some T3 around doesn't mean it's getting in. So in my opinion, the best indicator of thyroid status is your symptoms. It's how you feel, not the lab values. Now, use the lab values as a guide. Don't ignore the numbers. Please, nobody get the wrong impression that that's what I'm saying. Use the numbers as a guide, but it is always, always the most important thing when it comes to your thyroid status is how you feel. The lab tests are really just a runner-up. They're a second best because we don't have access to what would really, truly be the best thing to measure. Assessing only the TSH leaves many patients undiagnosed or inadequately treated. This is from the British Medical Journal several years ago. Why are we following a test which has no correlation with clinical presentation? The thyroidologists, by consensus, have decided that this test is the most useful for following treatment, when in fact it is unrelated to how the patient feels. The consequences of this have been horrendous. The TSH needs to be scrapped and medical students taught again how to clinically recognize low thyroid conditions. The consequences have been horrendous. Yes, they have. If you watching right now are resonating a lot with what I've been saying, then you know how horrendous the consequences have been, because maybe you've been living with fatigue, depression, constipation, hair loss, no sex drive, brain fog, all of these things for many, many years because your thyroid is being ignored, or they're looking at only the TSH and maybe your TSH has been normal all these years. And again, just so we don't forget, and I don't, if there are any medical professionals watching, the TSH test is useful in some cases. If your TSH is really elevated, yeah, you probably do have hypothyroidism. If it's really, really low and you're not on thyroid medicine, you probably do have overactive thyroid. So the TSH is not always useless, but there are far, far too many cases where the TSH is normal, and yet the person has raging signs and symptoms. So we've got to look at some of these other things. And when the author of this paper said that medical students need to be taught again how to recognize this clinically, how they diagnosed and treated hypothyroidism a long time ago, before these fancy tests were even available, was by symptoms. They had to treat you based on symptoms because there was no other way to evaluate you. They had to sit down with you, tell me how you feel, what's going on, because we didn't have these numbers to look at. And now that we have these numbers, it's as if let's pray to the numbers and lab test gods and completely ignore the clinical presentation, how this person actually feels who's sitting before me, right? It's infuriating, but you already know that if you're in this situation. So if the TSH is not always the best thing, what is? What do we need to measure? Well, some doctors will test your T4, some will. But I think if your TSH and T4 are normal, we need to look at a lot of the other hormones, because some of the other hormones might be insufficient or imbalanced, and that will explain why you feel so awful. And I see this all the time in clients. It's very, very common, especially in people who are struggling to lose weight on a low carb or keto diet. And to be clear, low thyroid is not always the cause of stubborn weight loss on keto, right? I wrote an entire book, that Stall Slayer book, about breaking fat loss stalls. There's a number of other things that I would look at first, but certainly thyroid can be a big contributor for some people. So if your TSH is normal, but you have multiple signs and symptoms of low thyroid, if you are the person I've been describing for most of this talk so far, you have to insist on a comprehensive thyroid panel. You absolutely must insist. Now, I know I have a lot of fans or followers watching from overseas. I don't know what the accessibility to these tests is outside the US, but in the United States, you can order these tests without a doctor, except in New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. But there are ways around that. So basically, no matter what state you live in, you can order these. It's easier in some states than others. So you may have to pay out of pocket. It is worth every penny if you get the answers you need. It is worth every penny to pay for these tests out of pocket. They're not that exorbitant. So what would you want to test? Do test the TSH. Don't ignore that. You also want the total T4, total T3, free T3. Free T3 is super, super, super important. And I think that you should do reverse T3. Reverse T3 is a little more expensive, but again, it's all worth it. And if you ever go to a lab and you think you're getting a comprehensive panel, you want to verify with the lab tech. Hey, can I just double check this order? I just want to make sure that everything has been ordered. Or if your doctor says, I ordered the full panel, you must verify with the lab when the blood is drawn. Because I've had numerous clients tell me, my doctor said they ordered the panel, and we get it back and it's the darn TSH, or it's the TSH and T4 if we're lucky. So you just really, really have to confirm that you are getting the test you want. Let's talk about the normal ranges for some of these hormones. I call it a hodgepodge, and that is putting it nicely. I will just share with you something that a client once told me, and it's the greatest line. Normal is a setting on a washing machine. Normal is not an adjective to describe human hormone levels. And sometimes they don't use the normal range, they use reference range, whatever. So let's see why this is such a problem. Just as one example, look at the TSH. Now, the units here you see picograms per deciliter, picomoles per liter, blah, 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 blah. Different countries use different units, different labs use different units. So you just see the numbers and the ranges there. Try to look for something that looks familiar to you. But the TSH, one lab lists it as 0.5 to 5.0 milli international units per liter. 0.5 to 5.0. That is a 10 times difference. So that means that your TSH could be one level and his TSH over there could be 10 times higher, and you are both considered normal. Same thing, look at the total T3, another example, in the middle of the total T3, 60 to 180 nanograms per deciliter. That's a tripling. My T3 could be one level, somebody else's T3 could be 3 times higher, and we're both considered normal. Do you see why this is such a problem? You see, it's so ridiculous. I would laugh if it wasn't so tragic. This is costing people's lives. Not that it's literally killing us, but it is robbing us. It is robbing us of quality of life, of energy, of a good sex life, of a positive mental outlook, of all this great stuff that thyroid hormone helps with. So it's ridiculous, but it's really more tragic than it is ridiculous. Let's talk a little more about the problems with normal. Normal does not mean optimal. And I said earlier, I hope that this video is shared far and wide beyond my, current existing audience. I love my audience, but I just hope that this information reaches more people. But for those of you who are on a low carb or keto diet, we sometimes like to measure fasting insulin. And many labs, at least in the US, will tell you that a fasting insulin of as much as 20 or 25 is normal. No, X. Most of us in the keto world, the low carb world, like to see fasting insulin under 10. Some people will tell you under 5 is ideal. I don't think we have the evidence to really support that, but certainly under 10. So normal does not mean optimal. Normal does not mean ideal. How you feel is more important than the numbers. I know I've said it more than once because it needs extreme emphasis. How you feel is more important than the numbers. There's no such thing as normal when it comes to this stuff. Remember that T3 hormone does its job inside the cells, not in the bloodstream. So that even if your blood level of T3 or free T3 is normal, you could still have signs and symptoms. And what tells us how much T3 is getting in your cells are your symptoms. So again, if your results are normal, so even if everything falls within the normal range, there's nothing flagged. If you have unmistakable signs and symptoms, consider the shortcomings of those normal or reference ranges. And I was going to say something else here before I move on. No, I don't want to take too much time. I just forgot a point here. Let's see. Right, yes. Some thyroid symptoms are what they call non-specific, meaning they could be caused by anything. A lot of different things can cause hair loss. A lot of different things can cause depression. A lot of different things can cause constipation. Any number of these things can have multiple other causes. But if you have a lot of them together, that kind of indicates toward hypothyroidism. Right? If you only had hair loss, well, I'm not going to automatically think you have low thyroid. If you only have constipation, I'm not going to say, oh, you have hypothyroidism. Like, not that I can diagnose anyway, but you know what I mean. If you only have one of the symptoms, probably not your thyroid. If you have a few of them, then it's that much more likely that we're sort of narrowing in on one underlying cause for all of the symptoms, right? So, if you're watching this and you're losing hair, but other than that, you feel terrific and you've got no issues, you probably don't have a thyroid problem. Okay. This is a consensus statement from 3 different thyroid associations. Again, you don't get more conventional than these types of organizations. Serum thyroid hormone levels are only a surrogate marker and may not reflect what is taking place at the cellular level. This is what I've been saying a few times, that the serum levels, your blood levels, they're a surrogate marker. They're not actually telling us what's happening. What tells us what is taking place at the cellular level are your symptoms. It's how you feel. That's what tells us how much is actually getting into your cells and doing what it needs to do. Some of you in the low carb world may know the name Penelope or Penny Figtree. She is a low carb oriented medical doctor in Australia. She's not super well known, but she has presented at some conferences. Well, she and I had a private communication, and she said, I have been a hardcore TSH only doctor my whole life. Never had a clue about the other tests. I'm really wanting to understand it now. As you know, low carb doctors want to know more and are not blind followers of the textbook they were taught. I'm going to skip the thing about her daughter, but basically she helped her daughter identify this issue. I am now much more open to how terrible this condition is and how important it is to treat the symptoms, not the blood test. Thank you, Dr. Figtree, so much for validating this. And again, when she says, I'm much more open to how terrible this condition is, it really is. If you're living with this, I am with you. My heart is with you. I still am not really optimized. Like I'm not where I want to be in terms of how I feel, but compared to where I was before I was medicated, it is like night and day. I try not to think about it too much because I've lost so much time. I've lost so much living to this. And someone out there watching is going through that right now. You're not alone. You're not the only one. There is help for you. Don't give up on yourself. This can be debilitating. If you're just watching this for fun and you've never been through this with yourself, the depression can be crippling, the lack of energy. It's, how many people have lost jobs over this? The brain fog, the fatigue, how many relationships have ended, how many divorces have occurred, how many children are missing out on having a vibrant, engaged parent in their life because someone is suffering from undiagnosed or inadequately treated hypothyroidism. And I should say, before I forget, this is just a little gee whiz point here, women are affected by hypothyroidism much, much more than men are. Men can and do get it, but it's about a 9-to-1 ratio of women to men that have hypothyroidism. Why? Nobody's really certain. Probably something to do with interactions with other hormones. We don't really know for certain, but it's much, much more common in women. And that could also be another issue with this medical gaslighting. When I'll just leave it there. I won't go further with that. Okay, let's talk about thyroid medicine, because if you do have a thyroid problem, you want to feel better. You want to feel well. So how do we go about treating this? Now, the thing is, ideally, you figure out why your thyroid hormones are a little bit wacky, to use the official scientific term. You would identify why this is happening and fix that. Because the medication, great. Thank goodness this medication is available and it's effective, but we wish we didn't need medicine, right? If you can identify why this is happening and fix that, great. But That can be really, really difficult, and it can take a very long time. And why should you continue to suffer? Why should you continue to feel awful when you can take the medicine, start feeling better, and then continue to investigate why this may have happened to you? Because good luck wanting to investigate, good luck having the wherewithal to dig deeper when you're fatigued and you have brain fog and you're depressed and you feel terrible. So even being on the medication can actually give you the drive that you need to do the detective work. Anyway, the number one most commonly prescribed medication for low thyroid is levothyroxine. In the US, the most common brand name is Synthroid, and there's a few other brands there too. The brands might be different outside the US, but the compound name is still levothyroxine. This is the number one most prescribed thyroid medicine. And again, this is what they're taught in medical school. They are taught to test the TSH and treat with T4, period, end of story. And for some people, this T4 medication works great. It works fine for some people. Remember, T4 has to be converted into T3. T4 is not the active form of the hormone. It is an inactive form. So that's a problem, right? What if your body's not converting it? But we'll come back to that. There is medication that is T3 medicine, and the compound name of that is liothyronine. The most common brand name in the US is Cytomel. And there are other kinds of medication that give you both T4 and T3, and these are the natural desiccated thyroids, or NDT. There's a lot of different brand names in the US. The most common brand name is Armour, but there's some other brands. And it's made from animal thyroid glands. They actually just dehydrate the thyroid gland and pulverize it into powder and put it in capsules. And that's what you get. I mean, it's standardized to a certain dose of the hormone, but in the US, if you've ever had Armour sausage or Armour bacon, Armour pork products, when they harvest those beloved little piggies for our yummy, delicious pork products, they take the thyroid glands, and that's where we get Armour thyroid from. There is no right or wrong with thyroid medicine. There is only what works best for you. Something that works really, really well for somebody else might not be the best thing for you. Natural is not necessarily better than synthetic. Brand name is not necessarily better than generic. What matters is what works for you. And unfortunately, it can take some experimentation. It can take a lot of trial and error to find the correct type and dose. Don't give up on yourself. You deserve to feel better. And this is the path forward. It can just take some time. Be patient. Don't give up. You will feel better eventually. Okay. I kind of mentioned this earlier. The biggest problem with levothyroxine, with Synthroid, with the T4 only medication is that it's T4 only. And a lot of people, so like I said, some people take this T4 medicine and they feel fine. Their bodies are good at converting that into T3, so they're good to go. In some people, for whatever reason, they do not make that conversion effectively. And no, I don't think it's selenium deficiency in most people. There's something else going on. So if you are someone whose body is not converting the T4 into T3 all that well, then this medicine is not going to help you that much. And another problem with a T4 only medication is that when you take T4, you run the risk of it being converted to that reverse T3, that impersonator imposter T3, which will actually make you feel worse. Because now, whatever little amount of T3 you may have already had, the reverse T3 is going to block it. So some of that T4 medicine might be converted to reverse T3. And so if you're in this situation, if you are taking Synthroid and you still feel like garbage, you won't know, or you won't know why if you don't measure the T3. If your free T3 is still low, you won't know if you don't measure. I see it all the time in clients, all the time. They come to me on Synthroid. It's almost like clockwork now. When somebody walks me through their situation, in an introductory email, they explain what's going on. Then I send them the paperwork to fill out. I can almost guess that they're going to be on Synthroid or levothyroxine. Like I just see it all the time, right? So this is a quote. I don't have the citation there. It's from Janie Bowthorpe, who runs a website. She has a book by the same name called Stop the Thyroid Madness. Stop the Thyroid Madness. T4 only medication treatment does the job to the same degree that an elevator, which only rises to the 5th floor of a 50-story building, does the job. Now, I want to come back to something that I said about anyone watching, or if you know someone who happens to have had their thyroid gland removed or irradiated. So you basically have no thyroid, basically, effectively no thyroid at all. And again, the gold standard treatment for if you need thyroid hormone replacement is T4. It's this levothyroxine. Remember what I said way earlier in this talk, that your thyroid gland produces mostly T4, but it does also produce a little bit of T3, and it converts some circulating T4 into T3. So if you have had your thyroid gland removed or irradiated, and you have been put on levothyroxine, you are missing out on whatever amount of T3 your thyroid gland would have made, and whatever additional T3 would have been produced via conversion. But it is the standard of care, the standard treatment for thyroidectomy to give you T4. There are so many people who have had their thyroid removed or irradiated who get T4 only treatment, and they gain weight, they lose hair, they have some of those other low thyroid symptoms because they are deficient in that T3. I hope I just reached somebody who's in this situation and maybe helped you understand why you're in that situation and why you feel the way you do. And now you can advocate for yourself. I see this all the time, and nobody tells you. Nobody tells you. Okay, let's get back to the slides. But again, whether or not you've had your thyroid removed, if you are taking levothyroxine/Synthroid and you feel great, then fabulous. You are one of the people for whom this medicine works just fine, because it does work fine for some people. Now, remember I said earlier that the very suppressed TSH does not automatically mean you're over-medicated. Doctors and other medical professionals worry about this because hyperthyroidism has its own set of problems, right? There's hormones, there's a sweet spot for hormones. You don't want to be too low or too high, right? Hyperthyroidism, you have kind of the opposite signs and symptoms of low thyroid. They often lose weight unexpectedly, unexplained weight loss, palpitations, rapid heart rate. You might feel extra warm. You might have insomnia. You might feel like a little irritable and have rage because your metabolism is revving too fast. Unlike the hypothyroid, where we are set to slow mode, you're kind of on ultra fast mode. There's some other symptoms too that are concerning, but are you over medicated if you have no signs or symptoms? And some people feel their best on doses of thyroid medicine that do make that TSH plummet, almost unmeasurable. And some people need to be on very high doses of thyroid medicine in order to feel their best. And medical professionals get very concerned, very scared about giving high doses of, well, some won't prescribe T3 at all, but they're especially concerned about giving high doses of T3 medicine because you can end up with like bone problems, osteoporosis, or atrial fibrillation and other cardiovascular issues. But what I have seen in the literature that I've read on this is that not only is it pretty rare, but it is almost exclusive to people who have pre-existing risk factors. It's very rare that thyroid medicine induces these problems, because taking thyroid medicine and having your TSH be a little bit lower is very different from your own body ramping up too high and bringing the TSH down. There's a very different circumstances there. I don't have time to explain the detail, but can you understand that your TSH being very low because your metabolism is revving like crazy because something's wrong is very different from your TSH being suppressed because you're taking some thyroid medicine from the outside and you feel completely fine. Even if, okay, the concern is real though. The concern is real, but how come doctors, there are other medications with far, far greater risks and that are far, far more dangerous that are prescribed routinely. No one gives a second thought to writing a script for many of those drugs, yet you practically have to murder someone to get your hands on some T3 medicine. So it's just incomprehensible to me how there are so many other drugs with really, really very, very risky safety profiles that are prescribed routinely for millions upon millions of people. And yet when we have a thyroid issue, it's so difficult to get that medicine when even if there are some problematic potential side effects, how come medical professionals can't manage that the same way they manage that in any other drug they would prescribe? You prescribe the drug and you monitor the patient. See how they do. If they start to develop problematic signs or problematic side effects, then you either reduce the dose or you maybe switch to a different medicine, but you don't withhold the medicine initially. You prescribe it and you monitor them. I do not know why this is not what is done with a T3 medicine. I just don't know. It's done with darn near every other drug that's prescribed. And again, drugs that are far, far more dangerous than liothyronine. I told you I was passionate. Okay. Moving on here. I was just talking about potential risks of over-medicating someone. And believe me, if you're over-medicated, you'll know it. Because if you're taking too much thyroid medicine, you will have the signs and symptoms of hyperthyroidism. You will have racing heart. You will have insomnia. You will feel warm. You might even have a slight little hand tremor. It's almost impossible to miss the signs and symptoms of being over-medicated. You won't miss it. So we've talked about over-treating. What about under-treating? What about the dangers of leaving someone under-medicated? This, again, from the British Medical Journal, our findings emphasize the need for laboratories to make their users aware that the reference ranges for some of these thyroid hormones in patients receiving thyroid hormone replacement are considerably different from the conventional ranges. They should point out the limitations of these ranges. We've talked about that with the tripling or the 10x, that the range is 9 miles wide. Don't tell me it's normal. But yeah, when this is a very complicated way of saying that when you take thyroid hormone medicine, some of those reference ranges may no longer apply to you. Because remember, it's normal to have a low TSH when you take thyroid medicine. So we might need a thyroid medicine normal. My co-author, Dr. Westman, has said sometimes that we might need a keto normal, where some of the reference ranges for certain lab tests might look different in somebody on a keto diet. But different doesn't necessarily mean bad or wrong or dangerous. It's just different, right? Those of you that are following a low carb or keto diet, this way of eating has so many different physiological and hormonal effects that it makes sense that certain parameters would be different on a diet of 5% carbohydrate compared to 50% carbohydrate, right? So if somebody's taking thyroid medicine, it may very well be that some of the existing reference ranges are not suitable. So it's just that's speculation, but it's something to think about. Now, let's take a closer look at the meds, because this will be fun. Bear with me. Do you want to take a guess as to the #1 most prescribed drug in the US in 2020, to the tune of 26 million patients on this drug? It's atorvastatin, a cholesterol-lowering medication, one of the statin drugs. And within at least the top 17 drugs, There's 2 more statins. So we've got 3 statins in the top 20 most prescribed drugs. Then let's look at antidepressants. There's data from 2019. There were 7 different antidepressants in the top 50 most prescribed drugs. There's just a handful of them. You are probably familiar with some of them. Maybe some of you out there are even taking them. So remember the signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism. I had that on an earlier slide. High cholesterol and depression. And again, high cholesterol and depression can be caused by any number of things, but if you've got some of the other symptoms too. So we've got millions upon millions of people taking statins and millions upon millions of people taking antidepressants. So who would like to hazard a guess as to the number 2 most commonly prescribed drug in the US? Data from 20. Number 2, 20 million patients. Are you sitting down? Are you bracing yourself for the answer? It's levothyroxine. It's levothyroxine. So how many millions of people are taking statin drugs and taking antidepressants when what they actually need is thyroid medicine? We're taking all these pills to treat the symptoms of an underlying cause that is being ignored, that is going undiagnosed or improperly treated. So when I get a client, and again, I'm not a medical professional, but when I get a client who looks very metabolically healthy, that, you know, all the blood sugar and insulin markers are beautiful. Everything else looks good. The triglycerides are low, the HDL is high, inflammatory markers are low. Like by every stretch, physically, metabolically, this person is very healthy, but their total cholesterol and LDL are high. I look at that and that doesn't scare me in terms of cardiovascular risk. That to me, especially combined with maybe they're having difficulty losing weight, maybe they are constipated, maybe they've got some other stuff. That to me is ringing the bell for hypothyroidism. So again, I see that very high cholesterol when everything else looks beautiful, that I'm not necessarily worried that this person's going to keel over from heart disease, but that is just yet one more indicator that this is very likely hypothyroidism. Okay, back to the slides. So this kind of emphasizes what we were just saying. Normal TSH values may not rule out patients that are hypothyroid. It's possible that a large number of hypothyroid individuals are missed using the TSH as a screening tool, which is a problem for the patient who remains hypothyroid and to the healthcare system as a whole. Yes, you bet it's a problem for the patient who remains hypothyroid and a problem for the healthcare system as a whole. It's definitely a problem for we patients, because if your TSH is normal and then you're told that it's not your thyroid or that your whatever medicine you're on is working, then you still have all your same signs and symptoms. This is horrible. You know how that other slide said the consequences of this have been horrendous. So it's terrible for the patient who still is depressed and constipated and fatigued and has brain fog and has no sex drive and all this other stuff. And it's a problem for the healthcare system as a whole, because if you have hypothyroidism that is undiagnosed or improperly treated, then you still have all the signs and symptoms. So a doctor is going to prescribe you a medicine to lower your cholesterol. They're going to give you a medicine to help you be less depressed. Maybe you're going to take a prescription or over-the-counter laxative. Maybe you are taking special supplements for the hair that you're losing, right? So this is a burden on the whole system. And if a patient is taking 4 or 5 medicines to treat the symptom of the underlying thing that's being ignored, then how many more medical visits are they having? How many more, phone calls, virtual visits? How many more just time? It's a time drain on the provider, on the medical professional who has to see this person that many more times to monitor all these drugs. Right? My goodness. Moving right along. Let's talk about the depression a little more closely, because I said that the numbers that were on that slide were my numbers, and I had very severe depression and apathy and no sex drive. And I want to tell you, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have shared my screen yet. I had very, very severe constipation too, as one of my symptoms. And I once went 2 weeks without a bowel movement. 2 weeks. Can you imagine? Now, I would sometimes use over-the-counter laxatives and high-dose magnesium supplements. I would take Senna tea, that laxative tea, to get things moving. But sometimes it would just be especially bad. And I would actually go get a colonic, or they call it colon hydrotherapy. It's like an enema on steroids, if you don't know what a colonic is. And you go to a professional for it, because not something you're doing at home. It's a special machine, a special device. And so the reason I'm telling you, the reason Amy Berger has just told the world that she once went 2 weeks without pooping is because that's pretty horrible, right? That's pretty bad. And yet, I want to tell you, I want to look directly into the camera. So I'm looking directly into your eyes, dear viewer, that I'm here to tell you that as bad as that was, my depression was worse. So I am beyond passionate about helping people with low thyroid get the proper testing and treatment, because this has robbed me of so much living and so much joy and so much pleasant life. I mean, that was the past. I'm doing much better now, but to think that there are people out there right now who feel the way that I felt then, I hope that something I have said or will say before this presentation ends resonates with you. Help is available. Don't give up on yourself. I know what that's like. I don't wish it on anyone. And I'm here to help. I'm going to give you my contact information at the end of this, but that's how bad the depression was. It is no way to live at all, frankly. Okay. So there's a lot of words on here. I just want to kind of blow through it real quick. Up to 40% of people with hypothyroidism have significant depressive symptoms. And what a coincidence then that up to 40% of people with major depression don't have resolution of their depression even after trying multiple antidepressant meds. Could it be maybe that some of them actually have low thyroid? They don't actually have depression. They have depression as a symptom of hypothyroidism. 52% of patients with refractory depression across 6 clinical trials showed evidence of hypothyroidism. Refractory means it's difficult to treat. It doesn't respond to medicine. They did a study of adults with bipolar disorder who had already tried up to 14 different medicines, and they started these people on 25 micrograms of T3. That's a pretty high dose of T3. Now, some people need higher. That's not the highest dose ever, but most doctors will start you on 5 micrograms, on a tiny, tiny little dose, and increase you over time until your symptoms resolve. But the fact is, this study, they started people on 25 micrograms. And I'm saying this because there may be an endocrinologist out there watching right now who's shuddering in their chair, because most endos, and I'm painting a broad brush here, there are always exceptions. Most endos hate prescribing T3, and if they do prescribe T3, they're really hesitant to go up to these higher doses. But anyway, that's what these people needed to feel better. Depression improved in 84% of these subjects. 38% of them had total remission on thyroid medicine, even though they had not gotten better with multiple antidepressant medications. The average doses that ended up being effective for these subjects were about 86 micrograms and 93 micrograms for men and women, respectively. That is a very high dose of T3. Remember, we're talking about T3 only. There's no T4. Those are very high doses, but that's what these people needed to feel better. The Texas Medication Algorithm Project for bipolar recommends a target dose of 25 to 50 of just T3, no T4, just T3, up to as much as 160 micrograms a day. That's super high. But if that's what someone needs to feel well, why do so many professionals insist on withholding this life-changing, beneficial, life-altering drug? It breaks my heart to think that there's somebody out there with depression who's not getting any better after trying 1, 2, 3, 4 antidepressants when maybe they have undiagnosed hypothyroidism. So let's talk about body weight, right? I started off kind of talking about why does a keto nutritionist care about thyroid? Well, a lot of people come to me for weight loss, not just weight loss, but very common. And if they're coming to me for help, it's because keto isn't working, right? If it was working, they wouldn't need my help. So there's probably some underlying problem, and very often it's hypothyroidism. So this top quote is related to, I've been talking about the removal of the thyroid gland and how the standard of care is to give you T4 medication. And you know now the shortcomings of T4 medicine and why it can be a problem for many people to only get T4 medicine. So there's controversy about the correct dose and form of thyroid hormone therapy for patients with hypothyroidism. Despite restoration of TSH to normal, so meaning you take T4 medicine and it normalizes your TSH, despite that, many patients complain of excessive weight gain. Why? Probably because you're not getting any T3. Small changes within the normal range are associated with measurable differences in resting energy expenditure, or BMI. Resting energy expenditure is just a fancy science word to mean your metabolic rate, like how much energy your body uses or how many calories you burn just laying there doing nothing. Just how much energy your body requires to keep its basic functions alive. And small changes within the normal range can have measurable differences in that metabolic rate. Remember, normal is a setting on a washing machine. It's not an adjective to describe your hormones and your signs and symptoms. So you could be in the normal range and still feel awful. I know some thyroid experts who like to see people at the midpoint or higher. Like if you're at the very low, specifically with pre-T3, if you're at the very low end of the normal range, well, you're within the normal range, but you're at the bottom of it, you might feel like a completely different, i.e. better person, a little bit higher, still within the normal range. I'm not talking about putting you out of range, but anyway, these small changes, tiny changes could add up over years. If you have just a metabolic rate that's just a little slower over the course of years, that can result in a lot of weight gain, right? Minor variations in the thyroid state are associated with significant changes in that resting energy expenditure. These minor deviations reflect significant physiological changes. They have the potential to become clinically relevant. Yes. Same thing at the bottom. Small differences within the normal laboratory range can be associated with measurable differences in resting energy expenditure. So this was a very interesting study that they took. So women, let's see, this top one. There are some thyroid savvy professionals who think that the TS range is far too wide. Remember, I said it was 0.5 to 5.0, a 10 times difference. So there are some people who think that the cutoff point should be 2.5. It shouldn't be 5.0. So if you're kind of in that higher end, still within the normal range, but high end of normal, some doctors think that that's actually a problem, that you may have low thyroid. So if you look, these people, TSH greater than 3.6 compared to a TSH of 0.4. Remember, the higher your TSH is, the more likely it is you have low thyroid, versus if your TSH is kind of low, you probably don't have low thyroid. And so the people that had slightly higher TSH, there was a difference in body weight of up to 12 pounds. And again, 12 pounds might not sound like a lot, but depending on how tall you are, it can make a big difference. Now, the second thing here is really interesting. They compared women who had been heavier in the past and had lost weight and were now somewhat slimmer. And they compared those women. That's what they mean by post-obese. Women who used to be obese and are now at a much smaller weight. They compared these women to women who are at that same small weight, but who had always been slim. They didn't need to lose weight to get there. So women who used to be much heavier, same size women who were never heavy. In the women who had lost the weight, their resting metabolic rate was 8% lower. I know 8% doesn't sound like much, but the researchers said that this could be responsible for up to a difference of 22 pounds. That's, again, 8%. Yeah, 8% every day over the course of a decade. Of course you could gain 20 pounds, right? And then, so let's look at the thyroid levels in these different groups of women. The post-obese women, the women who used to be heavy and are now slimmer, their free T3 was an average of 2.4 in the range of 1.9, excuse me, 1.9 to 3.0. Been talking too much. I should have had water here. The women who had never been obese, their average free T3, pardon me, was 3.4. So much, much higher. They have much higher levels of T3. And if you look at the ranges, 2.9 to 3.9, in the post-obese women, the highest free T3 was around the same as the lowest free T3 in the women who had never lost weight. I think this is part of why it's so common to regain weight after you lose weight, because it is actually a very common phenomenon for your metabolic rate to slow down when you lose weight. This is a documented phenomenon. It appears to happen a little bit less when you lose the weight via a low carb or ketogenic diet. Dr. David Ludwig out of Harvard has published some interesting papers on this. There is a metabolic slowdown when you lose weight. There is. It seems to be less of a slowdown when you lose it on a low carb or keto diet. So the way that you lose the weight seems to matter with regard to that impact on the metabolic rate. And I do think there are things you can do to combat that, to kind of help you not have that slowdown, but we don't have time for that in this presentation. I just am pointing out that among other causes and reasons, this is a contributing factor to why that weight seems to come back on so much more easily than it came off. It's because your metabolic rate is actually lower. Okay. You know that one of the classic hallmark symptoms of low thyroid is feeling cold all the time. In fact, before they had all these fancy schmancy blood tests, doctors used to diagnose hypothyroidism based on your body temperature. Isn't that interesting? They used to base it on your temperature. High levels of T3 are needed to realize the thermogenic potential of brown adipose tissue. Amy, what the heck does this mean in plain English? Thermogenic means generating heat, means staying warm internally. Brown adipose tissue, adipose is the scientific term for fat. So brown fat tissue, those of you that follow Dr. Ben Bickman out of Brigham Young University, he talks a lot about brown fat, brown adipose. Brown fat, think of it as metabolically active. It is part of what is responsible for keeping you warm internally. It's that sort of shivering response, that internal heat generation, right? One of the thyroid, you get so cold because your body is, remember, your whole metabolic rate is slower. You're not even able to produce enough energy to keep you warm. And so you need T3 to activate this brown fat. In the complete absence of thyroid hormone, basal metabolic rate or resting energy expenditure could be reduced by 30% or more, a change associated with markedly reduced cold tolerance. So I'll go to the end there. The thermogenic response of brown adipose tissue, the major site of facultative thermogenesis in mammals, is substantially reduced. So in the absence of thyroid hormone. Now, in hypothyroidism, in humans, we're not talking about the complete absence of thyroid hormone. Now, when they do studies in animals, they can actually just take out the thyroid gland or, cause them to stop producing thyroid hormone. We do that in humans when your gland needs to be removed. But what I'm trying to say is that this quote is talking about the complete absence of thyroid hormone. That's not really ever the case in humans, but okay, a 30% lower metabolic rate when you have no thyroid hormone. So what if you just have low thyroid hormone? You have some, but it's low. It's not enough. Maybe you have a 15% reduced metabolic rate or 10% or 8%, like on that other slide. That is still low enough that you're going to be cold all the time. Your body's not producing heat. And you're gonna gain weight, or it's going to be really, really hard to lose any because your metabolic rate is so much slower than it should be. Okay, we are almost done. We are in the home stretch, I promise. How do low carb diets affect thyroid status? You probably have heard, if you are following a low carb or keto diet, keto's bad for the thyroid. Women shouldn't do keto because the thyroid, keto kills your thyroid. No, that's not actually true. Some people feel better on a keto diet and they can actually reduce their thyroid medicine or stop taking it altogether. This has happened to plenty of people. It does appear to be more common in autoimmune thyroid. So if you have Hashimoto's, some people with Hashis go on a low carb or keto diet and they are actually able to reduce and stop medicine. It is not true that once you start thyroid medicine, you will have to take it for the rest of your life, except if you have had your thyroid gland removed or irradiated. Of course, you do need to take thyroid medicine for the rest of your life. What else goes on with thyroid and low carb? Hormone levels might change, especially T3. In some people who do low carb or ketogenic diets, the T3 does decrease. It does go down. But is that a problem? Is that automatically something to worry about? If you are in this situation, if you have been on a low carb or keto diet and your T3 has decreased, but you feel great, you feel perfectly well, you have no signs or symptoms of hypothyroidism, then don't worry about a problem that you don't have. Just because the number came down doesn't mean something's wrong or that there's a problem. It is speculated that you might be more sensitive to T3. So if a ketogenic or low carb diet somehow helps your body to be more sensitive to T3, then you don't need as much to have the same effect, right? This is exactly what happens with insulin on a low carb diet. We talk about insulin sensitivity. Going on a low carb diet makes you more sensitive to insulin. That's why your insulin levels are lower on a low carb diet, because your body's more sensitive to it. You don't need as much to have the same effect. And it is speculated that the same thing could happen in thyroid. And this only happens to some people, right? Some people, the T3 doesn't change at all, but it does decrease in some people. Do you know the name Stephen Phinney? Dr. Phinney is an MD, PhD, and he has been researching and studying ketogenic diets longer than almost anyone who is currently still alive. He's been publishing papers at least since the 80s. I read one paper by him from 1983, which, yes, I was alive. I was, I think, 5 years old at the time. So he's been at this quite a long time. He knows what he's doing. And I refer people to this article that he wrote. I send this link to people all the time. How many published studies from well-designed prospective human trials have shown that impaired thyroid function, i.e. hypothyroidism, occurs on a ketogenic diet? The answer to this question is quick and simple. None. None. Now let me just, okay, yes. I do want to say here, though, that some people have had low thyroid after following a low carb or keto diet for some period of time. However, this is not unique to keto. We tend to see this in women. We tend to see it especially in younger women. We tend to see it especially in younger women who exercise a lot and who do not eat enough food. So it's not keto that is doing it. What the issue is they are unintentionally starving themselves. They are demanding too much of their body with too little fuel, too little replenishment. And so remember what I talked about much, much earlier, the reverse T3, when your body is under a lot of stress. And I said a very low calorie intake combined with a lot of exercise, your body will ramp up the reverse T3 as a protective mechanism to force you to slow down, because you can only live that way for so long before you're just going to burn out and collapse on the floor. Your brain, your body's very smart. Your brain doesn't want that to happen to you. So your body's going to make more reverse T3, and you will have the signs and symptoms of low thyroid. So it's not keto that did it. It was that living that way, eating inadequate fuel for what they were trying to do. And this will happen on any diet, not just keto. Any diet can cause this when it's not done properly, when you are not giving your body adequate fuel for what you are asking it to do. So yes, I have seen and heard of cases of low thyroid, but it isn't keto per se, a ketogenic diet that caused it with no other factors at play. Okay, we are almost done. I think I have one or two more slides. Let's sum up. Thank you. If you are still hanging in there with me, thank you. TSH is not always the best indicator of thyroid hormone status. If you take nothing away from this entire talk, TSH is not the end all be all. The normal ranges may leave many people undiagnosed or inadequately treated and suffering. You may be one of them. You might be on Synthroid or levothyroxine. You might even be on T3 or NDT, Armour or something, and your levels are normal, but you still feel awful. Remember that those normal ranges are very problematic. Levothyroxine is not effective for some people. It works great for some. It does nothing for others. Some people require high doses of thyroid medicine. And if somebody needs a dose that's high enough that is suppressing their TSH into the floor, it doesn't mean they are over-medicated, especially if they have no signs or symptoms of hyperthyroidism. If they actually feel great, then they're not over-medicated. Advocate for yourself. Stand up for yourself. Fight for yourself. Fight for yourself. You are a human, not a number on a lab test. I mentioned earlier that I'm working on a book all about this. So this doesn't even include the half of it. This is just the main, most critical stuff to know. We're writing a full book about this with far more information in there. One of my co-authors authored a paper with a doctor here. My author is Carol Rosmith. She's a nurse practitioner and a PhD. She said, we will never argue for the dominance of a lab test when signs and symptoms are available. Amen, Carol. Never accept the results of a lab test that contradict how you actually feel or how your patient or client actually feels. And so wait a minute, there's one more slide, just one more. Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank you for sticking around this long and for watching and hanging in there with me. I truly, truly hope this was helpful. Subscribe to the channel if you're into low carb and keto diets or you want more about thyroid. I have other videos about thyroid if you want to search the channel. And visit my website, stallslayer.com. There's a work with me button, stallslayer.com, work with me, if you are interested in booking a consultation. Because I'm not a medical professional, I cannot prescribe medicine for you. I cannot diagnose you, but I can help you make sense of your situation. I can give you information, I can help guide you, and then you can work with a medical professional. And I am fortunate to be networked with medical professionals who get this, who understand thyroid in the way that I have just explained it to you here. They get this, they understand it. They will do the proper tests and give you the proper treatment. So if you don't know where to find such a person, contact me. That stallslayer.com has a contact form as well. You are welcome to email me through that, and I will try to get you the right help. As far as I know, I also have contacts in Canada. So outside the US, I'm sorry, I probably can't help you except in Canada. I am networked with some people that can help in, I believe, all provinces of Canada. So I'm going to end this now. My gosh, this is probably my longest video ever, but I hope that you learned something helpful. I hope that you feel less alone. I hope that you feel seen and heard and validated. I hope that what I have talked about has made you feel validated in the way that you have felt all these months, all these years, however long it is that you've been dealing with low thyroid. Don't give up on yourself. The right treatment is out there. And now that you understand all this, now that you have been educated, now you can be empowered to seek a different kind of treatment if you need to. Like I said, I am available for consultations, even if you just want someone to talk to, someone to vent to who understands this, who has been there. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you next time. Take care.